The gavel didn't just fall, it shattered. Sold to the gentleman at the back for 25 cents. Laughter erupted, a cruel wave bouncing off the worn wooden walls of the only auction house in Coyote Springs. Abigail Hayes stood on the rough-hewn platform. Her chin held high. Her eyes were dry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The humiliation was a wildfire burning through her veins, but she wouldn't let them see the smoke. "Too much for a skinny mare," a voice hollered. More laughter followed. Abigail didn't flinch. Not for these vultures gathered to watch a woman sold like cattle. Not for the banker, whose smug satisfaction was a greasy smear on his florid face. Not for the auctioneer, who'd sold off her father's life with the same detached efficiency he now applied to selling her. Sunlight slanted through the high, grimy windows, laying golden bars across the auction floor. Dust motes danced in the beams, swirling with every cruel chuckle, every whispered comment. Abigail focused on them. She counted the specks of light, anything to keep her mind from breaking apart. "Come on then, girl!" The auctioneer's assistant yanked the rope binding her wrists. "Your new owner's waiting." The hemp cut into her skin, adding fresh abrasions to the map of bruises already coloring her arms. The blue cotton dress, once her Sunday best, hung in tatters. 3 months ago, she'd worn it to church. Now it was stained with the filth of the jail cell where she'd spent the night. She stumbled down the 3 wooden steps, her legs stiff from standing for hours. The crowd parted like a dirty sea, men stepping back as if her misfortune was a contagion. The few town wives who'd come stood in tight clusters, their faces a mask of pity and profound relief that it wasn't them on the block. 25 cents. That's what 23 years of life was worth in the Wyoming Territory, 1883. Less than a decent meal. She kept her eyes fixed on the exit, refusing to look at the man who now owned her. What did his face matter? What did his intentions matter? She had already lost everything. Her father to a hangman's noose, her mother to consumption, their ranch to the bank. All she had left was her dignity, and she wrapped it around herself like armor, thin and brittle as it was. "Ma'am." The voice was deep, roughened by years and weather, but there was no mockery in it, no hunger, none of the cruel anticipation she'd seen in the eyes of the other men who'd bid until the price dropped too low to bother. Despite her resolve, curiosity pulled her gaze upward. He stood taller than most men in the room, broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather duster. His dark hair was threaded with silver, framing a face weathered by sun and wind. A long, white scar cut through his left cheek, disappearing into his beard. But it was his eyes that caught her. Clear blue, the color of a Wyoming sky in autumn. And they were filled with something she couldn't possibly have expected. Respect. The auctioneer's assistant shoved the end of the rope into the stranger's calloused hand. "She's all yours, mister. Enjoy your bargain." The stranger, her owner, didn't respond. His eyes never left hers. His gaze wasn't intrusive. It felt like he was reading a letter written in a language he only partially understood. Abigail Hayes. The sound of her full name, not girl, or you there, startled her. It was a name she hadn't heard spoken with any kindness in months. "How do you know my name?" The words escaped before she could stop them, her voice raspy from disuse. A shadow passed across his face, a flicker of something she couldn't read. "We should go. It's a long ride." He didn't pull the rope. He didn't grab her arm. He simply turned and walked toward the door, leaving her little choice but to follow or create a scene that would only feed the vultures. Abigail hesitated for just a moment before falling into step behind him. Her mind was a whirlwind. Who was this man? Why did he know her name? And why pay even a quarter for a woman whose reputation had been systematically destroyed along with her family's good name? This made no sense. Nothing made sense anymore. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Outside, the late afternoon sun beat down on the main street of Coyote Springs. The small frontier town was little more than a wide dirt road lined with false-fronted buildings. A general store, a saloon, the auction house, and the territorial bank that now owned everything that had once been hers. At the far end of the street stood the courthouse where her father had been tried, and right next to it, the gallows where he died. Abigail tore her eyes away from that terrible structure. She focused instead on the man leading her toward a wagon hitched to two sturdy bay horses. The wagon wasn't fancy, but it was practical and well-maintained. Like its owner, it carried the marks of years but showed no signs of neglect. As they approached, she heard whispers from the men who had followed them out of the auction house. "Blackwood's gone soft. Waste of money, even at that price. Fool to think she's worth the trouble." But there was something else in their voices. Disappointment, as if her new owner had somehow cheated them out of some gruesome entertainment they had been expecting. Blackwood. So that was his name. It suited him. Dark, reserved, unreadable. He stopped at the back of the wagon and turned to her. Without a word, he reached for her bound wrists. Abigail tensed, bracing for a rough hand, for the pull that would haul her into the wagon like a sack of feed. But that's not what happened. Instead of yanking or tightening the bonds, his fingers worked at the knots. He was careful, precise, loosening them with a patience that was utterly unnerving. "What are you doing?" she whispered, aware of the eyes still watching from the auction house steps. "Freeing your hands," he replied quietly. His voice was a low rumble. "No need for rope between us." The bindings fell away. Abigail couldn't stop herself from rubbing her chafed wrists. The sensation of freedom was so unexpected she almost didn't trust it. It felt like a trap. Blackwood glanced at the raw skin where the rope had cut deep. A muscle in his jaw tightened, a small, hard knot of anger. But he said nothing. He reached into the wagon bed and pulled out a canteen. "Water." He offered it without ceremony. Abigail hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to be suspicious of this kindness. But her thirst was a fire in her throat, and it overrode her caution. She took the canteen and drank, the cool water a balm to her parched throat. "Thank you," she said, the words automatic. She immediately regretted them. Why thank the man who had bought her like livestock? Blackwood took back the canteen. "Can you climb up, or do you need help?" The question, posed without assumption, took her by surprise again. She should have been ordered to climb, or simply thrown onto the wagon bed. Instead, she was being asked, "I can manage." Her legs were weak, but pride was a steel rod in her spine. She pulled herself onto the high wooden seat. Blackwood nodded once. He walked around to the driver's side and climbed up beside her. He left a respectful distance between them, a space that felt both like a courtesy and a warning. He picked up the reins, clicked his tongue softly, and the horses started forward. They left Coyote Springs behind. The wagon rolled steadily westward as the shadows lengthened across the prairie. Neither of them spoke as the town receded, becoming first a cluster of buildings, then a smudge on the horizon, then nothing at all. Only when they were truly alone, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the plains, did Blackwood break the silence. "Are you hungry?" The question was so ordinary, so human, it was like a blow. When was the last time someone had shown concern for her basic needs? The sheriff hadn't bothered to feed her. The auctioneer had treated her like a piece of furniture. "Yes," she admitted. There was no point in lying. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her without taking his eyes from the trail. "It's not much. Bread and some dried beef. We'll have a proper meal when we reach the ranch." His ranch. The words sent a chill through her. Abigail unwrapped the bundle. The food was simple but clean and surprisingly fresh. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, because despite his assurance, she had no idea when her next meal would come. As the food revived her, her questions began to burn more fiercely. Why had this man, this Blackwood, purchased her? What did he really want? And how, in God's name, had he known her name? "Why?" she finally asked, the single word cutting through the silence that had stretched between them for miles. Blackwood didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the trail ahead, his hands steady on the reins. "Why what? Why buy me at all?" She gestured back toward the town, now long out of sight. Everyone else. They were laughing, walking away. She couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew what would have happened to an unsold woman at that kind of auction. The thought made her stomach clench. Blackwood was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost as if he were talking to himself. "I owed your father." Of all the answers she might have expected, This wasn't one of them. It was a twist so sharp it left her breathless. Abigail turned to study his profile, searching for any sign of deception. "You knew my father?" Blackwood nodded once, a short, decisive movement. "Ezra Hayes. He saved my life once." The sound of her father's name on this stranger's lips was a jolt. For months, no one in Coyote Springs had spoken of Ezra Hayes except in whispers, his name forever tainted by the accusations that had sent him to the gallows. "That's not possible," she said flatly. "I would have known. He would have mentioned you." "It wasn't the kind of thing a man talks about," Blackwood said. "Not in these parts. Not with your family's sympathies." Understanding dawned slowly, a cold, gray sunrise. "You were Union." It wasn't a question. The war had been over for 18 years, but in places like Wyoming, the division still ran as deep and jagged as canyons. Her father had fought for the Confederacy, a fact that had never been forgiven by some in Coyote Springs. 83rd Pennsylvania Infantry, Blackwood confirmed. "Your father was with the 4th Texas." Her mind raced. A Union soldier and a Confederate. How had their paths crossed? How had her father, a man loyal to the South, saved this man's life? As if reading her thoughts, Blackwood added, "Gettysburg, July of '63. He found me wounded in the wheat field after Longstreet's assault. Could have finished me. Should have, by the rules of war. Instead, he dragged me to a field hospital. Never knew why." The revelation stunned her into silence. Her father had rarely spoken of the war. He'd come home with a limp and nightmares that sometimes woke the whole house, but the specifics of what he'd seen and done had remained locked away. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "If this happened 20 years ago, why come forward now? Where were you when they accused him of being a spy? Where were you when they hanged him?" Bitterness crept into her voice. If this man truly owed her father a life debt, where had he been when Ezra Hayes needed someone to speak for his honor? Blackwood's hands tightened on the reins. It was the only sign that her words had hit their mark. "I was in Denver. Didn't hear about the trial until after it was over." His voice remained level, but she could feel the tension coiled beneath it. "When I learned what happened, I came as fast as I could. Too late for your father, but not too late for you." Abigail looked away, watching the landscape change from open prairie to scattered stands of pine. The sun was sinking, painting the clouds in shades of blood and gold. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally, the question that had been burning inside her since the auction block. This time Blackwood did look at her, and Abigail saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. It was pain, maybe, or recognition. "I want you to have a choice," he said simply. "When we reach my ranch, you can stay, work for fair wages, or I can help you get wherever you're trying to go. Your decision." Abigail stared at him, searching for the lie, the hidden angle. No one did this. No one bought a person just to set them free, especially not a woman with her reputation, the daughter of a convicted traitor. "You're lying," she said flatly. "No, ma'am, I'm not." "Nobody does that," she insisted, her voice rising. "Nobody buys a person just to set them free." Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old, deep wounds. "Your father did." They lapsed into silence again as the wagon rolled on into the growing darkness. Abigail's mind was a tempest. Suspicion warred with a desperate, treacherous hope. Anger wrestled with curiosity. What if he was telling the truth? What if this stranger, this former enemy of her father, truly intended to help her? And if he did, what would she do with a chance she never thought she'd have? As the last light faded, Blackwood lit a lantern and hung it from a hook on the wagon frame. The small circle of golden light pushed back against the immense darkness, illuminating just enough of the trail to continue safely. "Not much further," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet of the night. "Another mile or so to the ranch house." Abigail nodded, suddenly exhausted. The day's events had drained her. The auction, the purchase, the impossible revelations about her father. Despite her wariness of the man beside her, she found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. "Rest if you need to," Blackwood said, noticing her struggle. "I'll wake you when we arrive." She wanted to refuse, to insist she was fine, But her body betrayed her. Her eyelids grew heavier with each sway of the wagon until, finally, she surrendered. She dreamed of her father, not as she'd last seen him on the gallows, but as he'd been before. Tall and strong, his face creased with laugh lines as he taught her to ride, to shoot, to run the ranch that had been in their family for 2 generations. Keep your chin up, Abby girl, he'd always told her. No one can take your dignity unless you give it away. She hadn't understood what he meant then. She did now. Miss Hayes. The gentle voice pulled her from sleep. Abigail opened her eyes to find the wagon had stopped. Blackwood was looking at her, his face half illuminated by the lantern's glow. We're here, he said quietly. Abigail straightened, blinking away the remnants of sleep. They sat in a small yard fronting a sturdy log house. In the darkness, she could make out the shapes of other buildings, a barn, what looked like a bunkhouse, corrals. Nothing grand, but it all looked well built and carefully maintained. This is your ranch? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. Blackwood nodded. Blackwood Ranch. Small operation, but the work's honest. He climbed down and came around to her side, offering a hand to help her down. Abigail hesitated only a moment before accepting. Her legs were stiff and she swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground. Blackwood steadied her with a hand on her elbow, releasing her as soon as she found her balance. The respectful distance was back. It contradicted everything she'd been taught to fear about being purchased by a strange man. Come inside, he said. You need food and rest. The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A wooden table and chairs stood in the center. Bookshelves lined another wall, a surprising sight on a frontier ranch. Practical items hung from pegs: coats, hats, a rifle. Blackwood lit several lamps, bringing a warm glow to the space. He moved with a quiet efficiency, hanging his hat on a peg, stoking the banked fire in the hearth until flames licked at the fresh logs. Sit, he gestured toward the table. I'll get some food. Too tired to argue, Abigail sank into a chair. She took in her surroundings. The books weren't for show. Their spines were worn with use. A desk in the corner held papers and a leather-bound journal. Everything spoke of a man who lived simply, but not carelessly. He returned with a plate of cold meat, bread and cheese. He set it before her with a cup of water. It's not much, he said. Hadn't planned on company. It's fine, Abigail replied automatically. After months of struggling, any meal was a banquet. Blackwood sat across from her. He didn't have a plate. He just watched as she ate, his expression unreadable in the flickering lamplight. When she'd finished, he spoke again. There's a room ready for you. The door has a lock. The key's on the inside. The statement, so matter-of-fact yet so laden with meaning, caught her by surprise. He was giving her privacy, security, the ability to lock him out. Why are you doing this? The question that had been circling in her mind all evening finally escaped. Blackwood's gaze dropped to his hands on the table. They were strong hands marked with the calluses and small scars of a man who worked his own land. When he looked up, his eyes held that same mixture of pain and resolve she'd seen earlier. I told you, I owed your father. That doesn't explain. She gestured vaguely at the room, at the locked door he'd offered, at this entire impossible situation. Blackwood was silent for a long moment, as if weighing his words. When your father found me in that field, I was as good as dead. Bullet in my shoulder, bayonet wound in my side. The field hospitals were overwhelmed. No one had time for a Union sergeant, not on that day. He paused, his gaze distant with memory. He could have left me, should have. Instead, he dragged me nearly half a mile to get help. Never knew why a Confederate officer would risk his life for an enemy. His eyes refocused on her face. Found out later he'd been captured. Spent 8 months in a prison camp up north. Maybe that's why he helped me. Maybe he just couldn't leave a man to die alone in a wheat field. He shook his head slightly. Never got to ask him. Abigail absorbed this. It fit with the man she'd known. Stubborn, principled, unwilling to let anyone suffer if he could help it. But it still didn't fully explain Blackwood's actions now. That still doesn't tell me why you're helping me, she pressed. That debt was to my father, not to me. When I heard what happened to him, Blackwood stopped abruptly, the words catching in his throat. He tried again. When I heard how they accused him, tried him, hanged him, I knew it wasn't right. Ezra Hayes was not a spy. Not for our side, not for anyone. He was too honest for that kind of work. He met her gaze directly. I was too late to help him. I'm not too late to help his daughter. The sincerity in his voice shook her. For months, she had been utterly alone, surrounded by people who believed the worst of her father. Now this stranger, this man who'd known her father for a fleeting moment 20 years ago, spoke of his innocence with absolute certainty. It was like cool water on a burn. Still, caution held her back. How can you be so sure? You didn't really know him. I know what kind of man risks his life for an enemy, Blackwood said simply. That man doesn't betray his own people. He stood abruptly, as if uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. You should rest. The room's through there. He pointed to a door off the main room. We can talk more in the morning. Abigail rose as well, suddenly aware of how deeply exhausted she was. Thank you, she said, the words coming more easily this time. For the meal and the room. Blackwood nodded once. Good night, Miss Hayes. As she turned toward the door, his voice stopped her. One more thing. She looked back. He was holding out a small iron key. For the door, he said. As I mentioned. Abigail took it. The metal was cool against her palm. Such a small thing, yet it represented something monumental. The return of choice, of agency, of basic human dignity. Thank you, she said again, the words wholly inadequate. She entered the small bedroom, closed the door behind her, and turned the key in the lock. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the most comforting sound she had heard in a year. The room was simple, a narrow bed with clean linens, a chest for storage, a small table with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out onto the blackness of the Wyoming night. After so many months of uncertainty and fear, the plain, quiet space felt like a sanctuary. Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. Only then, in the safety of this locked room, did she allow herself to reach for the one thing that was truly hers. From a secret pocket sewn into the torn lining of her dress, she withdrew a small silver locket. It was oval with a faded floral pattern etched on its surface. Her mother had pressed it into her hand just before the fever took her 2 years ago. Keep this close, Abby, Margaret Hayes had whispered, her voice weak but urgent. It will protect you when I cannot. Abigail had thought her mother was being sentimental, delirious with fever. Now she wondered. She opened the locket. Inside were two tiny portraits, her father on one side, her mother on the other, both painted in happier times. Holding it felt like holding a piece of them, a reminder that she hadn't always been alone. With careful fingers, she closed the locket and slipped the chain around her neck, tucking the pendant beneath what remained of her collar. Then she lay down, not bothering to remove her tattered dress. Despite her suspicion, despite the utter strangeness of her situation, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of her father, standing tall in a blood-soaked wheat field, choosing mercy over hatred, and of the man in the other room who, 20 years later, had made the same choice. She slept, but a question echoed in her dreams. Was it mercy, or was it something else entirely? The stars were still bright when Abigail woke, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room. Memory returned in a flood. The auction, Blackwood, the ranch, the key. She sat up listening. The house was quiet. Through the small window she could see the first hint of dawn lightening the eastern horizon. The night had passed without incident. No one had tried her door. No one had disturbed her. It was such a small thing, an undisturbed night's rest. Yet it felt like a luxury she'd forgotten existed. She rose and went to the window. In the pre-dawn light, she could see the ranch more clearly. The house sat on a gentle rise with a view of the surrounding land. To the east, open pasture rolled away toward distant hills. To the north, a creek lined with cottonwoods cut through the property. The barn and corrals stood to the west. It wasn't a large spread, but it was well situated. Abigail found herself automatically assessing it with a rancher's daughter's eye. Good water, decent grazing, a sheltered position against the prevailing winds. Blackwood had chosen his land wisely. The soft sounds of movement from the main room drew her attention. She hesitated, her hand instinctively going to the locket at her throat. Then she squared her shoulders and unlocked the door. Whatever came next, she would face it. Blackwood stood at the stove, his back to her, tending to coffee and frying bacon. He'd shed his duster, revealing a simple chambray shirt and worn denim. A gun belt hung from a peg near the door, within easy reach but not on his person. He turned at the sound of her door opening, nodding a greeting. "Morning. Hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't," she replied, suddenly conscious of her tattered dress and disheveled state. As if sensing her discomfort, Blackwood gestured to a door on the far side of the room. "There's a washroom through there, if you'd like to clean up." He hesitated, then added, "There are some clothes on the shelf that might fit you. They're clean." Curious despite herself, Abigail crossed to the indicated door. Inside was a simple washroom with a large tin tub and a smaller basin with fresh water. And on a shelf sat neatly folded clothing, a simple work shirt, denim pants like Blackwood's own, and plain but clean undergarments. She glanced back at Blackwood, who had returned his attention to the stove. "Whose clothes are these?" He kept his back to her as he answered. "My sister's. She stays here sometimes when she's passing through." The simple explanation should have eased her mind. It was a perfectly logical reason, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. A sister? Out here? It felt too convenient. Too neat. "And she won't mind me using them?" she asked, testing him. Blackwood shook his head. "Sarah would be the first to insist on it." With a nod she couldn't be sure he saw, Abigail took advantage of the offer. The cold water was bracing. The borrowed clothes, while slightly loose, were a godsend. Changing out of her ruined dress felt like shedding a skin, leaving behind some of the humiliation of the auction block. When she emerged, her hair damp but combed back with her fingers, Blackwood had set the table with 2 plates of bacon, eggs and bread, and 2 mugs of coffee. "Sit," he said. "You need to eat." She took the same chair as the night before. The hot meal was hearty, and she ate with an appetite that had been suppressed by fear for too long. Blackwood ate as well, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window, scanning the land, the constant vigilance of a man who was used to watching his back. "Your sister," Abigail said, breaking the silence. "Does she live nearby?" His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "No. Colorado, last I heard. She moves around, works as a nurse." "Was she also in the war?" Abigail asked, piecing things together. He nodded once. "Field hospital, Gettysburg." He paused. "That's how I found her again after. She's the one who patched me up when your father brought me in." The coincidence was almost too perfect. Both brother and sister, at the same battle, at the same field hospital, on the same day her father performed his act of mercy. The knot of unease in her stomach pulled tighter. "How convenient," she said, her tone sharper than she intended, "that you were both there to witness my father's good deed." Blackwood's gaze sharpened, his blue eyes turning hard as winter ice. "There was nothing convenient about Gettysburg, Miss Hayes. 51,000 casualties in 3 days. Your father's regiment lost nearly half its men taking Little Round Top. My company went in with 86 men, 23 came out." The stark statistics silenced her. Her father had once told her mother that after the battle, you could walk from one end of the field to the other without ever touching the ground. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean—" "No need to apologize," he cut in, his expression softening slightly. "You've got every right to be cautious." He set down his coffee mug. "Which is why it's time I explained exactly what I'm offering." He met her gaze directly. "As I said, you have choices. You can stay here, work for wages, real wages. I need help with the stock, the garden. It's honest work." He watched her, gauging her reaction. "You'd have your own quarters, not that room. There's a small cabin Sarah uses when she visits. Your time would be your own after work, and you'd be free to leave whenever you choose." It sounded too good to be true, which, in Abigail's experience, meant it probably was. "Or," she prompted, "or I can help you get wherever you're going. Denver, maybe further east. Enough money for passage and a fresh start. She studied him, trying to see the trap. Why would you do that? The debt was to my father. You could just keep me here as labor. The words she'd avoided hung between them. Slave, servant, worse. Blackwood's eyes were clear and direct. That's not how I repay debts, Miss Hayes. Your father gave me a choice when he pulled me from that field. I'm just passing that same choice on to you. Before she could respond, a sound from outside caught their attention. The distant but steady beat of approaching hooves. Blackwood moved to the window in an instant, his posture suddenly alert, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun belt on the peg. Riders, he said, his voice tight. 4, maybe 5 of them. Abigail joined him at the window, staying back from the glass. Her jaw tightened as she recognized the distinctive silhouette in the lead. Judge Thornton, she breathed, her voice dropping to a whisper. Maxwell Thornton, the man who sentenced my father to hang. Blackwood's expression hardened into granite. You know him. He presided over my father's trial, she said, her throat suddenly dry. He passed the sentence himself when the jury couldn't reach a verdict. Understanding, and something much darker, flashed in Blackwood's eyes. Get your things, he said quietly. I have nothing, she replied, her hand going to the locket. Just this. He nodded once, then reached for his gun belt, buckling it on with practiced speed. Stay inside, and stay away from the window. Let me handle this. Before she could protest, he stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. Abigail ignored his warning and moved to the edge of the window, positioning herself where she could see without being easily spotted. The riders approached at a measured pace. Judge Thornton led the group, his black frock coat and wide-brimmed hat marking him as a man of position. Behind him rode Sheriff Parker and 3 other men she recognized as the judge's usual cronies. Men who carried out his will when the law wasn't convenient. They reined in before the porch, spreading out in a loose semicircle. It was a tactical formation, not a social call. Blackwood, Thornton's voice carried clearly, his patrician Virginia accent a stark contrast to the rugged setting. A fine morning. Blackwood remained on the porch, one hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. A bit early for social calls, Judge. What brings you out this way? Thornton smiled, a thin, predatory slash in his face. A matter of property, I'm afraid. It seems you may have inadvertently purchased something that wasn't properly available for sale. Is that so? Blackwood's posture was relaxed, but Abigail could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. Indeed, Thornton said, gesturing to the sheriff. The Hayes girl was being held for outstanding debts. Her labor was to be auctioned, yes, but the auction was conducted prematurely, a regrettable error in procedure. Seemed like a legal sale to me, Blackwood's voice was level. Got the bill of sale right here. Paid in full. Thornton waved a dismissive hand. An error. The bank is prepared to refund your 25 cents, of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The girl, however, needs to return with us. From her vantage point, Abigail saw the calculation in Blackwood's stance. He was outnumbered 5-1. Seems strange, Blackwood said slowly, that a territorial judge would ride all the way out here at dawn over 25 cents in a procedural error. Must be important business. A flicker of annoyance crossed Thornton's face. The law is always important business, Mr. Blackwood. Of course, Blackwood agreed. But as you can see, I'm a man of modest means. That 25 cents was a significant investment. I'd need more than your word on this. Procedural error. The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Thornton's facade of politeness slipped. The law is clear. The girl returns with us to Coyote Springs. Now. Blackwood seemed to consider this, then shook his head slowly. I'm afraid I can't agree to that, Judge. Miss Hayes is under my protection now, as a resident of this ranch. Resident? Thornton sneered. She's a debtor, a vagrant, the daughter of a trader. She's a free woman, Blackwood stated, his voice dropping, taking on a dangerous edge. And this is my land. Your authority stops where my property begins. The standoff stretched, taut as a wire. Abigail held her breath. She could see the calculations running behind Thornton's eyes, the risk of open violence against a landowner, the potential consequences. Finally, the judge's posture relaxed, but his eyes remained cold as chips of ice. Very well, Blackwood. Have it your way. For now. He gathered his reins. But this matter isn't settled, and I'd reconsider your position if I were you. Associating with the daughter of a traitor isn't good for a man's future in this territory. With that parting shot, Thornton led his men back down the road. Blackwood watched until they were out of sight, then turned and re-entered the house. His expression was grim. That wasn't about 25 cents. No, Abigail said quietly. It wasn't. He crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured a finger into each and offered one to her. I think it's time you told me exactly what happened to your father, Miss Hayes, and why Judge Thornton is so interested in you. Abigail took the glass, the amber liquid burning a path down her throat. The warmth steadied her. She began to speak, the story tumbling out, the false accusations, the fabricated evidence, the trial that was a mockery of justice. My father wasn't a spy, she began, her voice quiet but intense. He was a rancher, a good one. She told him about the bank calling in loans, about her father going to Cheyenne for financing, and about the rumors that started while he was gone. The evidence, Blackwood asked quietly. What was it? Letters. Abigail's laugh was brittle. Supposedly written by my father to contacts in Denver, offering information about our neighbors in exchange for protection for our own ranch. She shook her head. The handwriting wasn't even close, but it didn't matter. Thornton declared it a matter of territorial security and passed sentence himself. They hanged him the next morning. The room was silent as Blackwood absorbed her story. And after? He prompted gently. The bank foreclosed immediately. Our neighbors turned away. Thornton made sure no one would hire me. Then the sheriff arrested me for trumped-up debts. The auction was arranged the next day. Understanding dawned in Blackwood's eyes. And Thornton expected to be the one to purchase your labor? Abigail nodded. The auction was moved up. He missed it. And I was there by chance, Blackwood murmured almost to himself. I'd gone to town to speak with the clerk who recorded the trial testimony. I've been looking into your father's case. Looking into it? Hope and suspicion warred in her chest. Why? The truth, Miss Hayes, he said, his gaze steady. I owe your father that much. He stood, moving to the desk in the corner. From a drawer, he withdrew a leather portfolio. And I think Judge Thornton knows I'm getting close. That's why he's so eager to get you back under his control. He opened the portfolio, revealing copies of the letters used to convict her father. You're right. The handwriting isn't his. I'm working on proving who actually wrote them. Abigail stared at the papers, her father's supposed treachery laid out in a neat, unfamiliar hand. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of vindication. Someone else saw the truth. But I haven't figured out why, Blackwood said, his expression grim. Why frame your father? Why go to such lengths to destroy him? The land, Abigail said, the words coming out in a rush as the pieces clicked into place. It has to be the land. Blackwood leaned forward. What about it? My father. He believed there was gold on the north section of our property. Nothing major, but enough to be valuable. He was keeping it quiet, saving to buy equipment to prove it before filing a mineral claim. Understanding lit Blackwood's eyes like a struck match. And if Thornton knew he could arrange for your father to be convicted, the bank to foreclose, and then acquire the land for a fraction of its value. Which is exactly what happened, Abigail's voice hardened. The bank sold our ranch to a holding company last month. Frontier Development Corporation. The judge sits on the board. Blackwood sat back, a grim satisfaction on his face. Now we know why he's so interested in you. You're the only one who can testify about the gold. The only witness who could challenge his claim. It doesn't matter, she said bitterly. The land is gone. My father is dead. It matters, Blackwood's voice was steel, because justice matters. Your father's name will be cleared, and Thornton will face the consequences. He gathered the documents. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. He'll be back. And next time, he'll bring more men and official papers. A chill went through her. Thornton wasn't a man who accepted defeat. What do we do? She asked, hating the helpless note in her voice. Blackwood's expression was resolute. We prepare. And when he comes back, we make sure he regrets it. The words hung in the air, a declaration of war against a man who held the law itself in his fist. For the first time in months, Abigail felt something other than despair. She felt hope, not the weak, grasping kind, but a steady, hardened hope, because she finally had an ally. "All right," she said, her voice strengthening. "Tell me what to do." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Blackwood moved with the calm efficiency of a soldier, teaching her the layout of the ranch, the escape routes, the hiding places. "First rule of survival," he told her as they walked the property line. "Know your ground better than your enemy does." By evening, her muscles ached, but her mind was clear. After a simple supper, they sat on the porch as darkness settled. "What happens when he comes back?" she asked, breaking the silence. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll need more than just the two of us," he said finally. Before he could elaborate, the sound of a single horse cut through the night, approaching fast. Instantly, Blackwood was on his feet, his hand on his revolver. "Get inside or," he commanded. But as the rider came into view, Blackwood's posture relaxed slightly. "Franklin," he called out as the man reined in. The man, tall and lean with a weathered face, dismounted quickly. "Caleb," he said, his voice urgent. "Couldn't wait for daylight. Had to warn you." He tipped his hat to Abigail. "Ma'am, Franklin Miller." "What is it, Franklin?" Blackwood asked. "Information," Miller said, his voice low. "About Thornton. He's in a rage. He's gotten another judge in Laramie to sign papers declaring the auction invalid. He's coming back, day after tomorrow, and he's bringing a full posse." The news sent a chill through Abigail. "There's more," Miller said, his eyes grave. "Something's not right about any of this. Hasn't been since they arrested Ezra." He looked directly at Abigail. "Your father helped me once, Miss Hayes. I never believed he was a traitor." He turned back to Blackwood. "Thornton's been systematically pushing out ranchers for 2 years, using the bank and false accusations. 6 ranches, all foreclosed, all bought by his company, Frontier Development. All with owners who were former Confederates," Abigail added softly, the pattern chillingly clear. "Exactly," Miller confirmed. "I've been gathering evidence, trying to build a case to take to the federal authorities." Blackwood leaned forward. "What kind of evidence?" "Bank records, witness statements. Not enough yet, but I'm getting closer." "And Thornton suspects," Blackwood deduced. "He knows someone's asking questions," Miller said. "That's why he's moving so fast now. You, Miss Hayes, you're the last loose end, the only one who knows about the gold." "How did you know about that?" Abigail asked, surprised. "Your father confided in me. The night before his arrest," Miller said simply. The confirmation was a cold comfort, but it raised a troubling question. "If he told you," she said slowly, "he might have told others. How did Thornton find out?" Miller's expression darkened. "Coyote Springs is a small town, Miss Hayes, and Thornton has ears everywhere, including among those your father might have trusted." The implication hung in the air. Someone close to her father had betrayed him. "This evidence," Blackwood said. "How close are you?" "Close," Miller said, "but not in time to stop what's coming." "Then we need to buy time," Blackwood said, his expression thoughtful. "Keep Miss Hayes safe until your case is strong enough." "That won't be easy," Miller warned. "Once he has those papers, he has the law on his side." "Then we'll find a way around the law," Blackwood replied, his voice hardening with resolve. After Miller had ridden back into the darkness, Blackwood returned to the porch. Abigail's mind was churning. "Do you trust him?" "As much as I trust anyone from Coyote Springs," he said finally. "His story checks out, but he has his own reasons to want Thornton brought down." "Is he telling us everything?" she pressed. Blackwood's gaze was steady. "No, but then, neither am I." The frank admission was a shock. "What aren't you telling me?" He was silent for a long moment. "I knew about your father's case before I came to Wyoming," he said finally. "It wasn't chance that brought me here." "How?" "Because I've been tracking cases like your father's for 5 years. Ex-Confederate soldiers accused of crimes on flimsy evidence. Property seized by corrupt officials. I've been working with the federal marshals. Unofficially. The revelation was another sharp twist. You're a lawman? No, he said, a hint of irony in his voice. Just a rancher who's seen enough injustice to recognize the pattern. So this isn't just about my father, she said softly. This is personal. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached inside his shirt and withdrew a chain. He pulled it over his head. In the dim light, she saw a small object hanging from it. Your father gave me this, Blackwood said, holding it out to her. The day he saved my life. Abigail took it. Her fingers closed around a small silver locket. It was nearly identical to her own. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside were two miniature portraits, not of her parents, but of a young woman and a small boy. Your family? She whispered. He nodded once. My wife, Rebecca. Our son, Thomas. Where are they now? She asked, her voice gentle. He took the locket back, replacing the chain around his neck. Gone, he said simply. Diphtheria. Winter of '68. The single word was filled with a universe of loss. I'm sorry, she said softly. Now she understood. The solitude, the quiet sadness in his eyes. We have one day, he said, the door to his past closing as quickly as it had opened. One day to prepare before Thornton returns with his posse. We should get some rest. Abigail retired to her room, but sleep wouldn't come. The revelations of the night swirled in her mind. Miller's warning, Blackwood's secret life, the two lockets, twin symbols of loss and honor, and the chilling implication that one of her father's friends had been his Judas. The danger was no longer a distant threat. It was coming, and it would be here by morning. The next day began before sunrise. Long day ahead, Blackwood said, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm that was coming. We need to move the cattle from the south pasture, he explained as they ate. Better to have them closer to the barn if there's trouble. They worked together, the familiar rhythm of ranch work, a bittersweet comfort. By midday, the cattle were moved. After a quick meal, Blackwood led her to a small shed behind the house. He unlocked a heavy padlock and swung the door open. Inside was an arsenal, rifles, shotguns, pistols, and boxes of ammunition, all neatly arranged. You're preparing for war, Abigail said softly. I'm preparing for all possibilities, he replied, lifting a Winchester rifle. Thornton will come with the law on his side. That doesn't mean he's planning to be lawful. He held the rifle out to her. You know how to use this. It wasn't a question. She took the weapon, its weight familiar in her hands. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12. The rest of the afternoon was spent in grim preparation. They cached supplies, food, water, ammunition, in several locations around the property. As the sun began to set, they stood on a small rise overlooking the ranch and the approach road. If it comes to the worst, he said, this is where you'll come. Good visibility, multiple escape routes. You've thought this through before, she observed. A man learns to be prepared, he said. His gaze was distant. It's the only way to survive. Before she could respond, a single rider appeared on the access road, pushing his horse hard. Even at a distance, she recognized Franklin Miller. Something's wrong, Blackwood murmured, already moving down the slope. He wouldn't ride like that unless there's trouble. They reached the yard just as Miller pulled his lathered horse to a stop. His face was drawn with urgency. They're coming, he called out. Thornton moved up his timetable. The posse left town an hour ago. 15 men, all armed. The court papers? Blackwood asked, his voice tight. Got them this morning by special courier, Miller confirmed. But that's not the worst of it. Thornton's telling them Miss Hayes is harboring evidence that could exonerate her father. Evidence that implicates respectable citizens. His gaze shifted to Abigail. He's painted you as dangerous, possibly armed and desperate. The implication was chilling. They might shoot first and ask questions later. How much time do we have? Blackwood asked. An hour, maybe less. Blackwood's mind was racing. Franklin, get your horse in the barn, out of sight. Miss Hayes, gather only what you absolutely need. Nothing that will slow you down. We're running? She asked. Not running, he said, his eyes hard. Repositioning. 15 men is more than we can face head on. But we can use the land to our advantage. He turned to her. his voice low and urgent. "You still have a choice. I can get you away from here. There's a trail through the northern hills to the rail line. You could be in Denver by tomorrow night." The offer was a lifeline, a chance to escape, to leave it all behind. But something had hardened in her since that auction. "I'm not running from Thornton," she said firmly. "He took my father, my home, my reputation. I won't let him drive me out of Wyoming, too." Blackwood studied her face. In finding no fear, he nodded once. "All right, then. Get what you need. We move in 5 minutes." Abigail grabbed only a canteen and the locket. When she emerged, 3 horses were saddled and ready. "Where are we going?" she asked as she swung into the saddle. "High ground first," Blackwood said, nodding toward the wooded slopes to the west. "We'll see how Thornton deploys his men." They rode out, moving with deliberate haste toward the pine-covered hills. As they entered the shelter of the trees, the ranch disappeared from view. They climbed a narrow, winding trail. Within 20 minutes, they reached a small clearing near the ridgeline, overlooking the ranch house. The access road was clearly visible. They tethered the horses and took up a concealed position among the rocks. They didn't have to wait long. A column of riders appeared in the distance, a dark snake winding its way toward the ranch. 15 men, just as Miller had said. They watched as the posse surrounded the house, then began to search the outbuildings. Suddenly, one of the riders pointed toward the hills, toward their trail. "They've found us," Miller whispered. "They're faster than I expected," Blackwood said, his expression grim. "They must have a good tracker." He looked at Abigail. "The offer still stands. Miller and I can create a diversion. You ride north." "No," she said, her voice firm. "My father didn't save your life, so you could throw yours away for mine. We stay together." Miller looked between them. "She's right, Caleb. Splitting up makes us vulnerable. And if something happens to you, all the evidence dies with you." Blackwood's jaw was set, but after a long moment, he relented. "All right, together. But we move fast and we stay silent. Follow my lead." "Exactly." He led them deeper into the forest, along a path so overgrown it was barely visible. The terrain grew steeper, more rugged. Finally, he drew rein at the mouth of a narrow defile between towering rock walls. "Here," he said, dismounting. "We leave the horses and go on foot." The passage was barely 6 feet wide, a natural bottleneck. Beyond it, the canyon opened into a broader space, ringed by steep cliffs. A small stream trickled down one wall. "Old Shoshone hunting camp," Blackwood explained. "Only one way, in or out." He led them to a position overlooking the narrow entrance, where a tumble of boulders provided perfect cover. "We wait here," he said, settling behind a large rock with his rifle. "If they find the trail, they'll have to come through that gap one at a time." Time passed with agonizing slowness. Just as Abigail began to hope they'd lost the trail, they heard voices, approaching from the forest. "Must have come this way. See how the brush is bent? Could be deer." "Deer don't wear horseshoes, Jenkins. Look here." Moments later, a figure appeared in the gap, a tracker, rifle in hand. Behind him came 3 other men Abigail recognized from town. Not Thornton's hardened enforcers, but local men. "Horses," the tracker said quietly, examining the ground. 3 of them. Fresh tracks." "You think they're still here?" one of the men asked. "Unless they can fly, they're in here somewhere," the tracker replied, scanning the rocky slopes. His eyes swept right over their position. Then another man shouted, "Up there! Movement among the rocks!" Instantly, 4 rifles swung in their direction. Blackwood reacted instantly. He stood, his own weapon lowered but visible. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice steady. "This doesn't need to get violent." The tracker, a man named Edwards, hesitated. "Blackwood? That you?" "It is," Blackwood confirmed. "Along with Miss Hayes and another witness to Judge Thornton's corruption. We're not looking for a fight." The men exchanged uncertain glances. "We have orders to bring the Hayes woman back," one of them said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Those orders come from a corrupt man," Blackwood replied. "He framed Ezra Hayes to get his land. He's done the same to others." The accusation hung in the air. "That's a serious charge," Edwards said cautiously. "You got proof?" Miller stepped forward. "I do. Bank records, witness statements, all connecting Thornton to a pattern of land grabs targeting former Confederates. He looked at Edwards. Your cousin's place last spring? It wasn't the only one. Edwards and the others exchanged troubled glances. I never did believe Ezra Hayes was a traitor, Edwards said quietly. Man saved my youngest during the fever outbreak. Rode 15 miles in a blizzard to bring medicine. He extended credit at my store when my crops failed, another man added. After a brief, silent conference, Edwards turned back to Blackwood. All right, we'll tell Thornton we lost your trail, but move fast. He's got more men searching. Men who won't be as willing to listen. We appreciate it, Blackwood replied. With a final nod, the four men disappeared back through the gap. Blackwood let out a long breath. That went better than expected. Small-town loyalty, Miller said grimly. Thornton underestimates it. But just as they were moving toward their horses, a new sound reached them. More voices, more hoofbeats, much closer. Too late, Miller whispered. More of them. Blackwood's expression hardened. Back to cover. This group won't be so willing to listen. They scrambled back to their positions, just as 5 riders appeared at the canyon entrance. These were not local townsfolk. These were Thornton's enforcers, hard-faced men with dead eyes. Leading them was a tall man with a cruel face, a man Abigail recognized with a chill. James Harper, Thornton's most trusted lieutenant, the man who had arrested her father. As they entered the canyon, weapons ready, Abigail knew with a terrible certainty that this confrontation would not be resolved with words. The real fight was about to begin. Harper and his men spread out, moving with the practiced coordination of wolves. Something's not right, Harper said, his voice a low growl. Edwards and his boys should be here. Probably lost the trail, one of his men sneered. Or they found something they weren't expecting. Harper's cold eyes scanned the canyon walls. His gaze swept across the boulders where they hid, pausing for a fraction of a second. Abigail's muscles tensed. He'd seen them. Check those rocks, Harper ordered, pointing directly at their position. 2 men dismounted, rifles ready, and began to climb. Blackwood waited until they were just 10 yards away. Hold it right there, he called, rising from behind his cover, rifle leveled. Harper showed no surprise. A cold smile touched his lips. Blackwood, thought we might find you here. His gaze shifted. Where's the Hayes girl? Hand her over, and maybe this doesn't have to get messy. There's no handing over happening today, Blackwood replied. Miss Hayes is under my protection. You and your men need to leave. Harper laughed, a short, humorless bark. Protection? You're outnumbered, Blackwood, and the judge has legal papers authorizing us to take the girl by any means necessary. Last chance to walk away, Harper, Blackwood warned. There's a lot you don't know. I know where my bread is buttered, Harper sneered. He shifted his weight, a subtle signal. Take them. The moment exploded into chaos. Blackwood fired, his shot catching one of the climbing men in the shoulder. Miller's rifle cracked an instant later, sending the second man diving for cover. Harper and his men returned fire from below, bullets whining off the rocks around them. Move back, Blackwood yelled, firing again to cover their retreat. There's a passage behind us. Go! Miller went first. Abigail followed, staying low, the Winchester clutched in her hands. Blackwood came last, firing methodically to keep them pinned down. The passage was a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. As Abigail squeezed through, a bullet struck the rock inches from her head, showering her with stinging fragments. They emerged on a steep, brush-covered slope leading up toward the canyon rim. Behind them, more gunfire erupted, followed by shouts of anger. She was halfway up when Blackwood emerged from the fissure. He was moving fast, but he was favoring his left leg. A dark stain was spreading on his thigh. He's hit, Miller called. Keep going. Blackwood shouted up at her, his face a mask of pain and determination. Get to the rim. The command propelled her forward. When she finally hauled herself over the top, she rolled over to look back. Miller was helping the struggling Blackwood. At the bottom of the slope, Harper and 2 of his men had found the fissure and were starting to climb after them. Without a second's hesitation, Abigail raised the Winchester. She had never shot at a person before. But in that moment, with Blackwood wounded and vulnerable, the decision was simple. She fired, aiming at the ground near Harper's feet. Next one won't miss, she yelled down. The warning shot bought them time. Miller helped Blackwood over the rim. We need to keep moving, Miller said urgently. North Ridge, Blackwood gasped. Horses, hidden in a box canyon. You planned an escape route, Abigail said. A statement, not a question. Always have a way out, he confirmed, wincing as Miller tore a strip from his own shirt to bind the wound. They moved away from the rim, Miller supporting Blackwood. The going was slow. After 30 agonizing minutes, they reached a narrow cleft in a rocky ridge. Hidden inside were 3 horses, their mounts from earlier. How? Abigail asked, amazed. Ranch hand. Blackwood managed a tight smile. Loyal. Miller helped him to a fallen log. The makeshift bandage was already soaked through. He was losing too much blood. He won't make it to Sheridan like this, Abigail said firmly. The bullet needs to come out. She looked at Blackwood. Where's the nearest safe place? He held her gaze, weighing his options against his fading strength. Line shack, he finally relented. 3 miles northeast. Basic medical supplies. 3 miles we can manage, she decided. But you're not riding alone. You'll ride with me. With Miller's help, they got Blackwood mounted behind Abigail on the strongest horse, his arms wrapped around her waist for stability. The sun was setting by the time they found the line shack, a simple one-room cabin nestled in a clearing. Inside, they found the basics: a cot, some food, and most importantly, a wooden box with medical supplies. While Miller checked the perimeter, Abigail got to work. My father taught me basic field medicine, she said, her voice steadier than she felt as she cleaned the wound. The next 20 minutes were an eternity. With careful precision, she probed for the bullet, extracted it, and then stitched the wound closed with even sutures. You have steady hands, Blackwood observed, his voice weak. My mother taught me to sew, she replied, focusing on her task, though she probably never imagined I'd use the skill this way. When Miller returned, reporting no signs of pursuit, they shared a quick meal. Harper will keep searching, Miller predicted. We should be ready to move at first light. They agreed to take watches. Abigail helped Blackwood get comfortable, then settled on a bedroll. Sleep came swiftly. It felt like only minutes later when Miller's hand was on her shoulder, his voice an urgent whisper. Riders! Coming from the south. Instantly she was awake. Blackwood was already propped up on one elbow, his eyes sharp. How many? He asked. Hard to tell. At least 3, maybe more. Abigail moved to the window. In the moonlight she could see them, shifting shadows of men and horses moving to surround the cabin. It's them, she confirmed. They found us. We need to move, now, Blackwood said, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. They've already got us surrounded, Caleb, Miller said. There's no way out. They were trapped. Blackwood reached for his gun belt. Then we fight. Wait, Abigail said, an idea forming, desperate and dangerous. There might be another way. She turned to Miller. Your evidence against Thornton. Where is it? He tapped his chest. Oilskin packet, always with me. Is it enough to convince the federal authorities? He considered it. With your testimony added? Probably. Yes. She nodded, her decision made. Then you need to get that evidence to Sheridan. Tonight. Both men stared at her. No, Blackwood said flatly. We're not using you as bait. It makes the most sense, she insisted. Harper wants me, not you. If I surrender, create a distraction, you can slip away in the confusion. Absolutely not, he repeated, his voice like iron. I didn't buy your freedom just to hand you over to Thornton. You bought me the right to choose, she shot back, her gaze unwavering. And this is my choice. The words struck home. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Miller broke the silence. She's right, Caleb. If we all stay, we all get captured. If she creates a diversion, one of us might get through with the evidence. He looked at Blackwood. And it has to be you. You know the marshals. They'll trust you. I'll stay with her. Blackwood's jaw was a hard line. And if they decide to skip the pleasantries, Franklin? I can handle Harper, Abigail said, with more confidence than she felt. Thornton needs the appearance of legality. He won't risk harming me openly. Outside, the noose was tightening. Time was running out. Blackwood looked from her to Miller, weighing impossible options. Finally, his shoulders slumped in reluctant defeat. "If this is going to work," he said, his tactical mind taking over, "it needs to be convincing. They need to believe they've caught you by surprise." "Tell me what to do," Abigail said, her heart hammering. The plan was simple. She would exit alone, hands raised, claiming Blackwood had abandoned them. Meanwhile, Blackwood would slip out the small rear window and make for the horses. Miller would surrender with her, maintaining the fiction. "You have until dawn to get clear," she told Blackwood. "After that, we tell them the truth to save ourselves." He nodded grimly. "I'll reach Sheridan by nightfall tomorrow. Marshal Dawson is a good man. He'll act." His eyes met hers, intense in the dim light. "2 days, Miss Hayes. Hold out for 2 days." It was a promise and a plea. 2 days, she agreed. Then she hesitated. "Caleb." It was the first time she had used his name. Something flickered in his eyes. "They're moving closer," Miller whispered from the window. "It's time." Abigail straightened her shoulders. "The south side has the least coverage," she whispered to Blackwood. "That's your best chance." He nodded once. "Be careful," he said softly. "Thornton is a desperate man." With those words echoing in her mind, Abigail stepped out onto the porch, her hands raised above her head. "Don't shoot!" she called into the darkness. "I'm coming out!" Harper's voice responded from the shadows. "Miss Hayes, where's Blackwood?" "Gone," she said, her voice laced with convincing bitterness. "Fled when he saw you coming. Left us to fend for ourselves." Harper seemed to buy it. He ordered a search of the perimeter while his men secured her and Miller. As they were being tied and put on horses, Abigail glanced toward the rear of the cabin. She saw only Harper's men emerging from the trees, shaking their heads in frustration. He had made it out. Now everything depended on him. The journey back to Coyote Springs was a long, tense ride. By late afternoon, the town came into view. Harper led them directly to the courthouse and up a narrow staircase to Thornton's chambers. Miller was taken to the cells in the basement. Judge Thornton sat behind an imposing oak desk, impeccably dressed. "Miss Hayes," he said, a thin smile on his lips. "How good of you to join us." "Hardly hospitality when it's enforced at gunpoint, Judge." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Spirited, just like your father." He dismissed Harper, leaving them alone. Abigail remained standing. "I know about the gold," she stated flatly, "and I know that's why you framed my father." Thornton merely smiled. "My dear girl, what an imagination. Your father was convicted on evidence presented in open court. The evidence was fabricated. And yet the jury was convinced," he replied smoothly, "or at least sufficiently divided." The casual admission of his crime ignited a cold rage in her chest. She kept him talking, telling him about the Frontier Development Corporation, about the pattern of foreclosures. She bluffed, claiming she had hidden evidence of her own. She needed to buy Blackwood time. "You're lying," Thornton said finally. "If you had evidence, Blackwood would have taken it to the federal marshals." Relief flooded through her. He didn't know about Miller's packet. He didn't realize that was exactly what was happening. "I believe we've reached the limits of this conversation," Thornton said, his patience wearing thin. "You will be held in a cell until your transfer to the territorial prison. The charges will include escape, conspiracy, and sedition." Before Abigail could respond, the door burst open. Harper stood there, a bloody lip, his eyes wide with panic. "Riders," he reported urgently. "Approaching from the north. A lot of them. Federal marshals by the look of it." Thornton's face drained of color. "Impossible. It's only been 1 day." "See for yourself, Judge," Harper said, pointing out the window. "That's Marshal Dawson's black stallion in the lead." Hope surged through Abigail, so powerful it nearly buckled her knees. Blackwood had done it. When Thornton turned back to her, the courtly veneer was gone, replaced by a cold fury. "This changes nothing," he spat. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a revolver, pointing it directly at her heart. "A tragic end. The daughter of a traitor, overcome by despair, takes her own life in my office." The courthouse doors burst open. Marshal Dawson stood there, flanked by his men. "Thornton!" he called out. "It's over! Release Miss Hayes!" Thornton responded by pulling Abigail in front of him, the revolver pressed against her head. "Not another step, Marshal. Unless you want an innocent woman's death on your conscience." Dawson halted. "This won't end well for you. We have documented evidence of fraud, corruption, and conspiracy to commit murder. The governor has been telegraphed. He's approved federal jurisdiction." The news hit Thornton like a physical blow. The pressure of the revolver against her head lessened for a fraction of a second. It was the opening she needed. She drove her elbow back into his midsection, twisting away from the gun. As she lunged toward the marshals, Thornton recovered, raising the revolver to fire at her back. But before he could pull the trigger, another shot rang out from the end of the hall. Thornton staggered, the revolver dropping from his hand. He clutched at his chest, a bloom of red spreading across his white shirt. He sank to his knees, his expression one of pure shock. At the end of the corridor, leaning heavily against the wall, a smoking pistol in his hand, stood Blackwood. His face was pale, his injured leg barely supporting him, but his aim had been true. "That," he said quietly as Thornton collapsed to the floor, "was for Ezra Hayes." Marshal Dawson's men rushed forward. It was over. Truly over. Her father's name would be cleared. Justice, after so long, had finally been served. As her eyes met Caleb's across the corridor, something passed between them. An understanding deeper than words, a connection forged in blood and fire, and a debt of honor paid in full. The price of freedom had been high, but standing in the sunlight streaming through the courthouse doors, Abigail straightened her shoulders. No longer a victim, no longer a piece of property. She was free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments below, what do you think happened to Abigail and Caleb next?